A growing men's rights movement pushing back against feminism, not in the US, but in South Korea. And there's actually a really interesting argument for why this kind of makes sense and why third wave feminism doesn't really make as much sense in a lot of ways in South Korea. Notably, conscription. Young men have to join the military, young women don't. We do have selective service in the US, but the draft isn't really much of a thing anymore. In South Korea, the draft is legit, it exists, and you have to do it. There's a really good reason for American men to push back and say, hey, what about this issue? But that's it. In South Korea, it's mandatory, it's happening, and people are angry about it, kind of thinking we shouldn't have it anymore. But I thought the story was interesting because it takes a look into men's rights activism and anti-feminism in a foreign country with a perspective we are not as familiar with, and the context is very different. So I want to read this story from CNN. South Korea's young men are fighting against feminism. So before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. But of course, the best thing you can do is share this video. The title of this is going to be something about fighting against feminism, and I can only assume YouTube is going to have a problem with it. But hey, it is what it is. YouTube has deranked this channel pretty heavily. My main channel seems to be doing great, but yeah. If you like what I do and think this is an important subject and I talk about things well, tell your friends. That's basically a word of mouth. Let's read. Seoul. On the same street corner in Seoul where 10,000 South Korean women rallied last October to demand an end to spy cameras and sexual violence, we're getting deranked anyway, screw it. The leader of a new activist group addressed a small group of angry young men. Quote, "We are a group for legal justice, anti-hate, and true gender equality," Moon Sung-ho boomed into a microphone to a crowd of a few dozen men waving placards. As feminist issues come to the fore in deeply patriarchal South Korea, there's a growing discontent among young men that they're being left behind. Moon, who leads the Dang Dang We, a group fighting for justice for men, is one of them. He started his group last year after a 39-year-old business owner was sentenced to 6 months in prison for grabbing a woman's buttocks in a Korean soup restaurant. The case provoked outrage that a man could be convicted on no evidence beyond the victim's claims. Yes, that's a big problem here in the US. Fortunately, our legal system does prevent things like that, but the court of public opinion will still destroy you. So this is another thing I think is interesting. You actually have, in this case, a guy going to prison because he was accused falsely. False accusations can lead to prison in the US as well. So I think kind of a parallel to an extent. Though I want to stress, our justice system is supposed to prevent that. While some lashed out at the judge, 29-year-old Moon found another culprit, feminism. Moon and his group held a panel discussion at the National Assembly, Korea's top legislature, in early September to expose what they perceive to be the alleged harms of the movement, saying, quote, "Feminism is no longer about gender equality. It is gender discrimination, and its manner is violent and hateful," he said to applause from his audience of about 40 mostly young men. The emergence of mainstream feminist voices and ideas came in response to the brutal murder of a young woman near a subway station in a trendy Seoul suburb, Gangnam, in 2016. The perpetrator deliberately targeted a female victim. Look, that's a fact. The overwhelming perpetrators of violent crime are men. The overwhelming victims are men too. But this is something you often hear only one side of. The feminists will say men commit all of the violent crime, and they'll leave out the other half of that. Men are also the victims for the most part. But in this instance, I will stress it's not unheard of that a man would be targeting a woman. It's probably more likely, or actually, no, I just countered that. It's not more likely, but it does happen. You are more likely to see a man victimize a woman than a woman victimize a woman in certain circumstances. The woman's death triggered an examination of attitudes towards women in the country, which broadened to include campaigns against harassment like the Me Too movement and anti-spy camera protests dubbed "My Life Is Not Your Porn." Too many. The discussion was long overdue in male-oriented South Korea, which ranks well below the global average on the 2018 Global Gender Gap Report, with major disparities in terms of wage equality and earned income for women. But, as I always stress whenever something like this happens, that's not job for job. You know, I was watching Rick and Morty. You guys may watch it. There's an episode where they go to a planet where the women have taken over, and Summer, one of the characters, says, because Rick, the grandpa, says that, men and women are equal. And she goes, equal? Women get paid 77 cents on the dollar for the same job. And that's the lie. It's just not true. I think women get like 95 to 97 cents. And there's social reasons for why they're not negotiating or not receiving raises. They say, Campaigners found support from the South Korean government and President Moon Jae-in, who vowed to become a feminist president before he was elected in 2017. You know what I think it is? I can't spend, I don't want to go through every single issue here, but I will read some of these. But I think this is what I often said about feminism. Feminism exists because of patriarchy, in a sense, okay? Let me try and explain. It's not that feminists rose because there's a patriarchy that exists and they want to destroy it. Feminism was allowed to arise because society views women as weak and in need of help. This is why when you see on TV a man being, slapped in the face or punched or hit, everybody laughs. And when it's a woman, everyone goes, oh no, how dare you? Society views women as weak. So when a woman presents a feminist issue they want to fight for, everyone says, that's right, you poor woman, you need help. When a man presents an issue like forced draft or, divorce courts being biased or, getting longer prison sentences, they say, oh God, here comes the incel, good luck getting laid, all of these things. The reason is, men are supposed to shut up and take it. Now, it's interesting that feminists often point this out, and they say men are victims of the patriarchy too, being told to just man up and not cry about it. Okay? And then when men come out and say, I agree, I'd like to point out these issues, they mock and belittle them. And society has no respect for any man who wants to highlight issues men may be facing. In fact, there was one famous incident where there was an event that was going to be talking about male suicide prevention and cancer, and feminists shut it down. So there you go. The point I'm trying to make is, if society viewed women as strong, they wouldn't tolerate it. Society views men as strong and not in need of help. Therefore, any actual problems faced by men are ignored. But you do get intellectual dark web types. You get people who are moderate and reasonable and say it's not about who's on top, who should be on top. It's about, can we solve a problem? Are men going to prison for longer than women? Well, we should solve that problem and ask the question of why that is. Why do courts favor women? Well, that's a female privilege. I don't think we should increase the amount of time women go to prison. Perhaps we should decrease the amount of time of prison for everybody. Or actually reform our prison system and actually work on rehabilitating criminals instead of just putting them in a box. But I digress. So check this out. South Korea's young men are more opposed to feminism than older generations. This is kind of amazing. Is there better context here? They say, Park and Kim are not alone. A Real Meter poll last year found that 1,000 adults found 76% of men in their 20s and 66% of men in their 30s oppose feminism, while nearly 60% of respondents in their 20s think gender issues are the most serious source of conflict in the country. Wow. So young men, anti-feminists, check this out. This is huge. 50.5% of men in their 20s are anti-feminist, patriarchal. That's incredible. End of old masculinity. For 62 years, South Korean men have been forced to join the army. The tradition, which began with the Korean War, requires all able-bodied men between 18 and 35 to serve between 21 to 24 months in the military. But unlike their fathers, today's youth don't believe in this traditional male duty. Moon's government is trying to increase the number of women in the military, where they currently make up around 5.5% of active troops, according to the latest figures. But right now, women are exempt from compulsory conscription. And of course, that's going to be a huge issue. Now, listen, you've got something contentious there. You got the DMZ, you've got North and South Korea. The Korean War is still technically on, it's my understanding. So it perhaps makes sense to have compulsory military service. But I will ask right now, women don't have to serve combat if that's their concern. Women can do other things. So what is stopping South Korea from saying everyone should have to enlist? In Israel, everyone does have to enlist. That's my understanding. Fact check me, I don't have the source pulled up. But my understanding is that men and women join the IDF. Why would South Korea be any different? So I do try to keep these segments short. So I will just say, one thing South Korea can do to probably alleviate this is just be inclusive in terms of your draft. Otherwise, you're just going to see more and more men upset that they're being forced to go to the military and women aren't. And the big conundrum they bring up here is if that's the case, while they're in the military, women are advancing their careers, and when they get out, they'll be at a disadvantage. You cannot have an equal society. You cannot have true gender equality if we're treating all the genders completely differently and drafting some and not the others, acting like some are victims and others aren't, where you say, women need all this support, but ignore the fact that men aren't going to college anymore. They're not getting jobs anymore. Young men are seriously hurting. So I think you'd probably find young men in their 20s in the US, you'd probably find similar numbers. I don't know to what degree. But I think the thing is, there are going to be a lot of young men who are at home without jobs being berated and beaten down every day saying that they're the problem. If they keep talking about empowering women, and then when young men suffer, they say, well, you're just an incel, men's rights, whatever, you're not going to solve the problem. You're going to make it worse. But as I was told during Occupy Wall Street, I was told by one of the activists, it's our turn now. That's how they view it. Not all of them, but enough of them. And that's a problem. We want equality. Well, they want to be in charge. So you're not going to win because the pendulum will swing back and forth. I'll wrap it up here. Stick around. Next segment will be coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. Podcast at 6:30 p.m. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all next time.